and turn your microphones on if they're not, so we can record the meeting. We'll go around the room and have the members introduce themselves. Mayor?
Terry Wepler, Lake County Representative, Mayor of Libertyville.
Ann Sheehan, City of Chicago.
Rita Athens, City of Chicago.
Jerry Bennett, representing Southwest Cook County.
Joe Zabo, CMAP staff.
Rick Reinbold, South Cook.
Frank Beal, City of Chicago.
Mike Montgomery, City of Chicago.
Mayor Frank Piccolo, DiPietro, representing DuPage County.
And
Leanne Redden, representing the NPI Policy Committee.
on the phone, we have Mayor's...
Mayor John Noak, Nicholas County.
Mayor Noak?
Andrew Madigan from the City of Chicago.
Welcome, Andrew. Carolyn, you're on the phone too?
Matt Brawley from Montgomery.
Yes.
We got 4.
So, okay, Mayor Brawley, we have Andrew Madigan, we have Mayor Noak, and we have Carolyn Schofield on the phone.
So
Okay?
there is a quorum, and before you, the minutes of our previous meeting, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I was going to adjourn.
Need to make a change. to the
Moved in
agenda.
second. All in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote of no. Also, I'd like to add to the agenda, the group will go in exec session regarding the search committee on a new executive director, so I will call for that at the end of the meeting to go into executive session. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At your place is the update on the local technical assistance program. We would also like to welcome Mike Montgomery, our newest board member, appointee from the City of Chicago. Welcome. Looking forward to your due diligence and commitment to the agency. Also want to thank Farzan Parang, who Mike Montgomery is replacing, and recognize Farzan for the service that he gave to the CMAP board. Just a couple of items to report on. On April 24th, I did have a meet and greet with the new regional administrator here in Chicago for FHWA, Arlene Coker. Great sit down, and really enjoyed getting to know her, her sense of energy and vision, shared with her CMAP's priorities, and just how we felt that we could best continue to coordinate with each other on the federal level. Also testified before the Illinois Senate Joint Committees on Capital Infrastructure Needs. So it's a joint committee with Transportation and Appropriations. That was on Monday, April 29th. And of course emphasized the CMAP principles, the fact that any new transportation bill, capital bill, not only is it necessary to move forward on, and that there needs to be a sense of urgency, but also that it be done right. We believe that's so important that it has to be done with sustainable revenues in a way that is fair, equitable, and flexible. The hearing opened up with former U.S. DOT Secretary Ray LaHood, calling for an increase in indexing of the motor fuel tax. As I mentioned last month, CMAP has been a part of what is now a growing coalition that has rallied around essentially our core principles on transportation. You got a flyer at your place. We're pushing up to 30 members now. And while it's heavy in the Chicagoland region, it is statewide. There are several here that are statewide, but Secretary LaHood has in fact signed on as a formal member of our coalition. And also at your place is a copy of a joint letter that the 7 county board chairs have signed that has been distributed to the members of the Illinois General Assembly, also calling for a capital bill for transportation that is based on CMAP's principles.
You can add the Illinois Municipal League. I brought that up as a motion last week to our board, and they're in support of putting their name on that letter.
Yeah, great, another statewide organization, so continuing to build momentum on that. Melissa was out in Washington, D.C. last week, attending the Association of Metropolitan Planning Organizations, AMPO, their annual meeting. Also gave her an opportunity to meet with our congressional delegation and the authorizing committees. Next week, I'll be in D.C. attending the annual CAGIT meeting. And of course, we'll continue to advocate CMAPs in the region's federal priorities as Congress and the White House continue to discuss a potential infrastructure bill. I'll be a part of congressional visits, meetings with key committee staffs, and also with USDOT. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that is my report.
Thanks. Any questions of Joe? Mike, it's gonna take a while to learn all these acronyms for all these organizations. Took me about 10 years to finally caught on. Moving on to contracts and procurements. Angela?
Good morning, Chairman Board. I bring to you today 4 procurements that I'm seeking your approval for. The first one is approval to enter into a sole source agreement with NREX for truck data. The second one is approval to enter into a sole source agreement with LifeRay Inc. for maintenance of CMAP's content management system for our website. The third is approval to enter into a contract with OmegaBit for website hosting and support. And the fourth is approval to amend our current contract with Wright Harima. They're our architectural design firm we're using for the move to the post office, and we're requesting to add mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection engineer, and an audio-visual data center design services to the current contract. With that, I'm also requesting, with the amendment, that we're able to provide, pay for those services with a portion of the broker credit we're expecting from Cressa. So I'm seeking approval on these 4 procurements today.
There are items 5.1 to 5.4. Are there any questions on those? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further questions? All those in favor signify by a vote of aye. Opposed, vote of no. Motion carries. How's that coming along, by the way?
Mayor Bennett, Matt Walsh, I'm on the phone. I approve.
Okay. We would add Matt Walsh to the roll call. Thank you.
Thank you. The move, how's it going?
Oh, so just a quick update. So we just, last month, the board approved the amendment to add Crest as our project manager, so they will serve as our external project managers on the project. With this agreement, we can start the design phase of the project. Our designs need to be completed to some degree by July so that we can go out to bid for a general contractor, but we need to have final designs to the landlord, I want to say in November. With that, we would go through plan review through the City of Chicago, get the permits to start construction in March with the planned move date of sometime in the summer. That's just a
We have an
high
internal
level.
schedule together that we're trying to keep pace with.
Absolutely.
Hopefully the permits from Chicago won't be too bad, right?
No problem.
Any aldermen in the city of Chicago here? Thank you, Angela.
Thank you.
Under the committee reports, the coordinating committee was canceled this month, and a written summary of the working committees should be in your packet.
Did we vote on,
Moving along.
did we vote on it?
I'm sorry?
Did we vote? I didn't remember if we voted. I remembered the motion second. I didn't remember.
think we
if
voted,
voted.
Was there a vote? Yeah. Yeah. There,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we've
Okay.
got the
I
vote.
couldn't-
Thank you.
Terry, you trying to confuse me already this morning?
I'm trying to confuse me. I'm confused. Me too.
Under the draft, 2020 draft budget and work plan, Angela, you're back up again? By the way, the members on the phone, if you did not hear, we are going into exec session. This meeting looks like it's gonna move along pretty quick. Please stay on the line because it's very important. It's regarding the search committee and dates going forward, and we need to have everybody on board for that, so please stay on the line. We will ask the audience to move out immediately, and so you don't have to sit on that phone too long, so we'll get an exec session going right away. I'm sorry, go ahead, Angela.
At your place is a draft of CMAP's FY20 comprehensive budget for your review. At the June board meeting, CMAP will present the comprehensive budget for your approval. Just want to cover a couple things, highlights of the budget. The budget reflects CMAP's funding requirements to conduct its core NPO activities, to coordinate projects that implement the recommendations of Volunteer 2050, to provide funding for non-transportation planning work, and to provide funding for the Council of Mayors, the counties, the transit agencies, and the City of Chicago in the form of operational dollars and competitive funding. Total revenues are projected to be $19.8 million, and that's up $1.4 million from the prior fiscal year. Total expenditures are projected to be $19.5 million, and that's up $1.2 million from the prior fiscal year. Couple of highlights to note about the FY20 budget. there was a stabilization of the local dues, I'm sorry, I got a little tongue-tied there, at its 3-year historic rate of $887,000. CMAP will basically not increase local dues in FY '20. Over the last 3 years, we've had 99% collection rate of local dues since the inception of the program in 2006. And because of this, and the anticipation of a state budget, based on our operational need, there was not a need to increase the local dues for FY '20. Another highlight of the budget is that we were able to award $1.3 million in competitive funding to CMAP, RTA, CDOT, and CTA. Each of these projects were 100% funded, whereas in previous fiscal years, only a portion of the projects were funded. Another highlight I want to mention is that the budget reflects a 5% decrease under personnel costs due to a new salary calculation that we use this year. And it's basically a factor of turnover rate, an average full-time employee that we have on payroll in any given month. And so this calculation, because it impacts salary, it also impacts the contributions to pension, FICA, and Medicare expenses. And this was done for a couple reasons, but one of the main reasons is because we were expecting a significant increase in our pension contributions due to the late market conditions of 2018. We were anticipating some significant increases in our pension contributions. Some other things I want to mention in the budget for FY '20, there was an 8.5% increase in operating expenses, and this is due primarily to our relocation to the post office. So there was construction costs, we contemplated IT purchases, and just there's an annual fee associated with our letter of credit that we had to contemplate. There was a 3.5% increase under occupancy expenses, and that's just due to our standard lease agreement where there was increase in rents, real estate taxes, common area expenses, and utilities. Finally, you'll note there's a 37% increase under contractual services, and some would say that's significant, but this is implementation year 4 onto 2050, so there's several projects slated to kick that off. We were also recently awarded 4 projects through state funding, the pavement management project, the truck routing studies, the development of a port master plan, and additional funding for the LTA program, in which we're required to come up with matches. Also, in addition to that, we're going to complete a couple of MPO core required projects. We're kicking off the ITS, the Intelligent Transportation System Infrastructure Project. We should be completing the travel survey and the land use model, so those things will happen in FY '20 as well. Final note I wanted to make is that for FY '20, we were unable to use local dues to offset operational costs as what was done in FY '19. However, local dues for FY '20 will be used as state match for the projects I mentioned before, because we're required to come up with matches. And then also a new calculation by GATA is requiring that certain occupancy expenses are no longer eligible under indirect costs. So we have to apply that through local dues in our general fund. So just those are the 2 ways we're planning to use local dues for FY '20. So those are just some of the highlights I wanted to mention about the FY '20 budget. And as I mentioned before, I'll come back in June for board approval, and I'm open for questions.
Go ahead, Britt.
Angela, I understand with the personnel how you were able to lower, but that does include maintaining current staff
Yes.
and a merit increase for.
Right. So Rita, being a city person, you might understand this. We did a salvage calculation basically.
Yeah, so it still allocates the full FTEs, but the fact is you're never at full
Right,
employment
100%.
all year long. And so it's an approach that I use with the feds the same way, that, you know, you actually do a slight discount on it to more accurately reflect the payroll that you're actually paying out over the course of the year.
Okay, but it's still at current staff level.
Correct, 107.
Oh.
Because on average, we, at least based on historical data, we maintain about 98 employees a month.
Question. This document just shows approved budgets and proposed budgets. There's nowhere in here, and maybe it's somewhere else on your website, where you actually show actual or accruals.
We can provide that, yes. We didn't,
So, I think that gives a better snapshot of
Okay.
year over year or comparison from previous years as opposed to just what we.
that's a good point. We can provide that, and going forward, we can incorporate that into future budgets. Or, probably be too late to do it for the final, but yeah, for FY '21, absolutely.
The audit would reflect that, but going forward, you don't see that.
And the audit doesn't really, what board sees, it doesn't give you the line on
Right.
that.
Yeah, it
Doesn't give you the side-by-side comparison.
We can do
Yeah,
that,
so even though
yes.
it's in there, you'd have to do a lot of homework.
We can do that,
to
yes,
get to that.
absolutely.
Other questions? Again, the board will approve this next month, finale of it. Any other questions or comments you may have between now and then? I'm sure Angela will make herself available.
Absolutely.
The due structure is going forward. I mean, there's a lot of contractual things going on this year. You indicated about using dues in 2021. How do you see that going forward as a rebalance then of the due structure
In terms of,
of use? You're applying, it
oh,
appears a lot with
I
contractual agreements here.
absolutely think in FY '21, well, we have a new executive director coming on board, but my recommendation would be that we apply them towards operational costs.
One of the
Absolutely.
things that we had to deal with going into this cycle is, if you recall, the letter of credit that we had to sign with the post office required us to essentially isolate and hold aside some assets. And so, in the past where we were expending those, we now, needed to set them aside and can't really count on them as true operating reserves as we would have in the past, because it's not liquid. We can't tap it. So,
And that's held
that
till.
causes a little bit of stress.
That's held till.
For a decade, it starts phasing down.
Yeah, after the first 4 years, it phases down, then I wanna say it phases down for 4 years, but in the end, it's locked at 600,000
Oh,
until
okay.
the end of the lease.
Oh.
Half is what it initially is.
Okay. Any questions from those on the phone? None being, we'll move on. Thank you, Angela. Next item is the CMAP MPO Policy Committee MOU proposed update. Melissa?
Good morning. In your packet, you have proposed MOU edits. As you may recall, we last updated the MOU in October 2017. Since then, last year, after the adoption of ON to 2050, the board made changes to its committee structure. And after that, we went and revisited the MOU, and what we realized is that there were references to the coordinating committee. We went to one coordinating committee, there were still references to there being two, which were the programming and the planning committees. Before that, it had been referenced as the local and regional committees, so just to remind you that we had continually needed to update that section to revise how we were naming these committees. So what we tried to do in some of these edits is to make it more flexible in relation to CMAP's committee structure. We're also proposing some other additional changes. They're more grammatical or stylistic. Some things that are a little more substantive is that we're proposing to change the references to the policy committee to the MPO policy committee, which makes it consistent with what we have in the MPO policy committee bylaws, the CMAP's website, and CMAP practice. One of the other called little more substantive changes is talking about the reference to the 4 levels of CMAP's committee structure, changing that top level from policy committee to a governing level. And one of the reasons why is there's a little confusion between that being the policy level and then we had a reference to the policy committee. So changing it to governing versus policy will be more reflective of what the two boards are responsible for and avoid that confusion. The other thing that it does is it clarifies that the Transportation Committee is an official working committee of both the CMAP board and the MPO Policy Committee. Made the change to capitalize the references to the CMAP board and also changed a historical reference to the Regional Planning Board to the Regional Planning Act. I've consulted some members of the MPO Policy Committee to get their feedback initially in this original draft. What I'd like today is if there's any comments from the board. we can take those into consideration and do some more due diligence with the MPO policy committee members over the next month, and then bring the MOU edits back to both the board and the policy committee at their meetings in June.
Questions
approval.
regarding it? Has the new Secretary of Transportation been in touch with us?
So I had a meet and greet with him actually, last month, and he does, intend to attend, yeah.
Well, he's an inside guy, so I would expect him to know the mechanics of what goes on between us and the MPO. And we'll be an active participant. You don't seem too sure about that.
No, I think it will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it will
Just
be.
looking at your facial expressions.
Yeah, no.
Very good. Any other questions? Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Next is the overview of the MPO programming responsibilities. And I welcome our former PL from the Southwest Conference, Barb Zubek.
Good morning.
Good morning, Barb.
So I'm Barb Zubek. I was a former PL. I worked for Mayor Bennett, and I'm happy to finally be presenting for him. What are we going to be talking about today? Oops. Here we go. So we're going to talk about the TIP and how we use programming to basically manage federal transportation projects in the region. So why do we TIP? I'm going to answer the question right off the bat to get it out of the way. It's so that we can manage the region's access to federal transportation funding, achieve efficient and effective allocation of funds, maintain fiscal constraint, have a transparent and accountable process, and then use data and criteria to evaluate projects. We're currently working on our messaging for the TIP and how we're sending this message out to the public, and we're working with communications here at CMAP. So this is a work in progress, and we're currently refining it. So what is the TIP? Does anyone know, or should I just skip ahead? It's the Transportation Improvement Program.
There you go. There's an acronym. The most important one.
First one, right?
And the Transportation Improvement Program, it's actually two parts. We have the list of federal projects that we manage with the ETIP, and then it's also an actual document that you can find on CMAP's website, which is the 2019 through 2024 TIP. And that's how we explain how we program projects. Basically, anything involved with programming is in that document. I highly suggest taking a look at that. And then why we TIP and why we program and why we use the TIP, it's because it's a federal requirement. The minimum is 4 years, but CMAP, we do 6 years in our TIP document, and we reflect 5 years of projects in the ETIP. All federal funded projects are in the TIP. We need to show a conformity determination, and then we have to document progress towards achieving performance targets. I'll talk about that in a second. And then we have to be consistent with ON to 2050, and then we have to show that we're implementing the TIP using the financial resources found in the financial plan. And then basically what I like to tell everyone is that the TIP is a short-term implementation tool for the plan.
Barb, what is a conformity determination for those that may not know? What does that mean?
Sure, I will get there in a second.
Okay,
But,
all right, great. Sorry then.
So how do we make programming decisions? So we use performance-based programming here at CMAP, and an example of this is the recent call for projects that closed in March for the STP Shared Fund, CMAC and TAP projects. For those projects, we had criteria on how we would evaluate and pick these projects. And then right now, the staff is currently evaluating all those projects, and STPL, which is the fund source that the PLs back there, they manage those fund sources through their councils. And all the councils are currently in development, creating their methodologies, and all the methodologies have performance-based metrics to choose these projects.
You need to back up and explain what TAP is. TAP.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So I use a lot of acronyms because I'm very used to STP, a Surface Transportation Program, CMAC, congestion mitigation air quality. TAP is transportation alternatives program. I have a bad habit of just flying through those acronyms, so my apologies.
We all do.
Another thing that we're doing here is putting performance targets into the ETIP. The TIP is constantly evolving, and these performance targets are newer to the TIP, and this is just another element that we just added. It's a federal requirement. Like I said earlier, we need to document our progress towards achieving these performance targets. And right now, this is what we're doing. We're putting it into the TIP, and we're just trying to collect as much data as possible. So this is the fun part. Does anyone want to guess what was obligated in 2018? And that is basically what was spent on federal transportation projects last year. Anybody? $1.6 billion. So how does a staff of 7, that's how many people are in programming, manage $1.6 billion here at CMAP? Well, we have a very handy tool called the ETIP. The etip.cmap.illinois.gov is our database that CMAP uses to manage all these projects, and it's also the tool for our programmers to submit projects and changes, and then also a tool for the public to view and search projects that are in their communities. And with the ETIP, that's how we amend our list of projects that we have approved every 4 years. And those amendments are made or approved through the Transportation Committee. And then every change to a project is completed and documented in the ETIP. And then we have 2 types of amendments, formal and administrative. And a formal amendment is something that is above our amendment threshold, a major scope change. An administrative amendment is something that CMAP staff approves, and that's minor scope changes, cost changes below thresholds, or changing a completion year within TIP years. So this is an example of just the 70 formal amendments that went to TC. You can see here that there were $46 million in projects submitted in that change, and that's what the Transportation Committee is approving. Every TIP amendment cycle, there's about 300 changes that programming staff approves or passes along to the Transportation Committee to approve. So beyond just CMAP and programming staff, who's involved in this process? We have a public involvement component, and for the formal amendments that we post for the TC committee, those are open for 7 days for the public to make comments on. And then conformity, what Joe asked about, we have a conformity amendment that takes place twice a year, and that's open for 30 days. And conformity is we need to show that our projects conform to air quality regulations, or must conform to regulations, projects must conform to regulations governing air quality. And so we're able to amend our TIP twice a year with projects that are adding capacity, adding lanes, any major project that could possibly affect air quality. Our goal here is to hopefully not make it any worse, but actually trying to make air quality better. So we have that amendment open twice a year for 30 days for public comment. And then so another big component of who's involved are the sub-regional council of mayors, and they are the main link between locals and CMAP. There's 11 sub-regional councils and the city of Chicago. And then we have our planning liaisons, which are a major component of how we do all this programming. They're in the back there. If you're ever wondering who those people in the back corner are, that's them. Raise your hands. Thank you, PLs.
Or referred to as the mob.
So the planning liaisons are just one part of the programmers who manage projects in the ETIP. The planning liaisons are managing their locally sponsored federal projects. So that's beyond just the STP CMAC TAP that I talked about earlier. It's any federal project that's within their council. And there's constant communication between CMAP, IDOT, the PLs to implement these projects and get them to the letting. And so the PLs and all these programmers that include IDOT, counties, transit agencies, the city of Chicago, the tollway, they are submitting these cost changes and amendments to that ETIP database that I talked about earlier. And then finally, once we bring these project changes to the Transportation Committee, there's some final approvals that the state needs to do for the State Transportation Improvement Program. And then the TIP and the STIP are approved by FHWA and FTA.
Say
and
that
then-
one fast 10 times.
And then I always like showing this when I'm talking about programming, because this is our master transportation schedule, and we make this schedule a year in advance. And if you look at the right hand side, you see the IDOT letting schedule, and we take those dates and work backwards. So any project that is making any changes or amendments for the September letting, those are being made right now. And then you can see what committees and due dates are all involved in this process. So if you look at September, those TIP revisions are due May 29th. So that's how far in advance the PLs are working with CMAP and IDOT. And this is all because of the different amounts of coordination just to get a project to letting. And that's all I have for you today. I am happy to take any questions.
Any questions of Barb? We need to have staff present a cheat sheet on acronyms, so everybody can, who does not have that in our brain, can at least follow
There
it.
should be
I'm
an
just-
appendix to our residency.
In fact, at one time, I think, yeah, that I thought I've seen it before. We wish the process could be lessened, certainly when you drill down to the local level, as our PLs all know back there, of sometimes how difficult and complicated this is to go through a process. But again, it's under federal and state regulatory requirements, which someday, hopefully someday, that'll become less. We hope that with each new transportation
Oh, you
secretary
optimist, you.
would begin that process of change. But that's why projects take so long. I guess that's my bottom line for anybody out there who knows this industry and knows how difficult it is sometimes to get a project and why it takes 1 year or 2 years. When you look at the requirements and the process of permitting, eventually to go out to bid, it's incredible. We wish that would someday be lessened, but. Barb, good job, thank you.
Thank you. Here's my contact info. If you have any more questions or anything comes to mind, let me know and I'll be happy to answer.
Thanks, Barb. Moving on. Under our 2050 update, Jesse.
I have one slide, and I have to try to bring it up here.
Now, that's lessening the burden.
Do I press this button here? All right, now I'll resume my normal.
Matt, how'd you go from phone to here? There you go. Welcome.
All righty. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to talk this morning about something that's come up a couple of times during the process. The 2040 development process, and that is the fact that the development side overlaps a lot with the statewide governors. So we're looking for feedback this morning from you on the extent to which that's an issue and what some options I have. So on our current schedule of updating the plan every I thought I didn't hear enough feedback. That's good. On our current schedule of updating the plan every 4 years, that puts us at October 2014, October 2018, and then our next plan update would be due in October 22. And of course, the governor's election is November of those years. So that puts the kind of critical last months of plan development during what's generally the most intense part of the statewide campaign. So again, the first question for you today is whether you think this situation is causing a problem, is an issue, Plenty of topics that we have in the plan have a political dimension to them, and they can become campaign issues, and that's everything from state and local taxation to economic development policy to individual transportation projects. Now, when we developed the plan, for those of you who were with us going through this last cycle, you know we try to frame issues in a way that makes them broadly agreeable. That's the recommendations we're trying to get to. We're seeking consensus. But it is still that it could be that the board and MPO policy committee would have a harder time getting to yes on plan recommendations if they're also campaign issues. So second question is how we would change the plan cycle if we were to do so. And the memo that you have in your packet talks through two options besides just staying on the current cycle, which would be updating the plan in October 2022. And those options are essentially based on what federal law requires us as an MPO to do, meaning that we have to, going back to what Barb was presenting earlier, we generally have 4 years before we have to update something. That's both the plan and the Transportation Improvement Program. So basically, we could do our plan a little bit earlier or a little bit later. And those options kind of correspond to this chart that we've got up on the screen. So if we do the plan earlier, which we think would probably be October 2021, that could have some mixed effects. One thing to think about is how plan adoption affects our ability to really generate or ride some momentum for work that actually implements the plan. So being able to come right out of the gate with implementation activities. The memo goes into why that timing could help or hurt plan implementation. It also isn't totally clear that adopting the plan a year earlier would actually do a whole lot to take it out of the way of a campaign, given how long campaigns last. And then I also think just from a technical standpoint, staff effort standpoint, it could be challenging to pull off another significant plan update in 2021. So there's that, given all the time the process takes. So if we do it later, by contrast, in the year after the next statewide election, the mayoral election of the city of Chicago, then the plan could better reflect the initiatives of those elected officials. Timing would also be better, I think, from a technical standpoint, since we would have census data and we'd have some other analytical tools we've been working on available. And I think, it also would simply be better to have a little bit more time. Now, in order to get here, this later option that I have up on the screen is the second bullet too in your memo. We'd also probably have to do a kind of technical update early on just to make sure that we don't go beyond the 4 years allotted by federal law. So I'll consider that a minimal or technical update that we would do shortly to get us on the next cycle. And then, there's staying the course, staying on the current cycle, which arguably has the benefit of helping shape policy agendas for newly elected statewide officials while they're still in formation. So that is one thing that you can say in favor of it. But the possible downside is that it could also make actually voting to adopt the plan somewhat harder to do. So, like I said from the outset, this is a question that's been brought up by numerous different stakeholders in different places, and that's why we're bringing it to you. If it seems early, it's because if we want to do something earlier in particular, we need to start kind of planning for that pretty quick. And so this is also an issue, not just for CMAP board, but also the policy committee. So we'll bring this to them in June. We'll also be going and talking to Federal Highway Administration. They are our regulators, at least for the transportation plan part of the comprehensive plan. So we'll be chatting with them. And of course, the new CMAP executive director, we would seek input from that person as well. So thanks for your attention on this. Looking forward to your thoughts. Looking forward to your insights, really, about moving the plan cycle or not moving the plan cycle.
Just my only comment, I've been here from day one. I've never felt that there was that being a problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think this agency, why it was created and what we've done over the years was in fact to drive policy. I can't recall, other than some transportation projects in the capital plan that caused some controversy, but the overall plan itself, I don't think has ever been interfered or caused interference by a political election, nor would I believe that we would change. I would recommend that we change what we've always done, and that was to be independent of the political process. and that those who are in or out, look to this agency for that direction. And in fact, whether new policies are developed, we're supposed to be the cutting edge. We're the ones that they're supposed to go to. In fact, eventually to then go to the political trail and preach the word. And I think, we've developed the word over 2 plans now. So personally, I've never really seen that as a problem in the past, and I certainly wouldn't look to change that because of maybe some question over politics.
So-
I certainly agree with you, Chairman Bennett. I think, one of the strengths of this agency is being seen as nonpartisan. The other thing, just in reality, it's always an election. It doesn't matter whether there is one or not one. People are always, we say the gubernatorial election, sometimes the off-year election can be just as. So I think if you try to gear it towards that, it's a losing battle.
I think the key is the challenge here, and much of this is driven by insights that former Secretary Blankenhorn brought to us, who sat in both positions, both in this chair as well as secretary. And it was at his urging that we took a look at this, given that the chairman of the MPO Policy Committee, which is a critical body in adopting the plan, serves at the pleasure of a governor. It does create the opportunity, for some challenges. And so Randy did recommend that we take a look at changing the cycle, get it away from the politics. I think you're right. There's always some kind of election going on. But I think the key point is that we always want to be as provocative as we can be in advancing sound policy. And sometimes, unfortunately, that does get tempered when you have to reach consensus.
Jerry?
I agree with you. I don't think our board should be governed by who happens to be running for office at any point in time. Good planning is good planning, and it should be done by us. And, if the politicians running don't like it, so be it. But we should be doing planning based on what we think is best, rather than saying, well, we need to conform to whoever was running for office at any point in time.
Yeah, and honestly, I'm surprised that Randy, of all people, who brought that up, whether that he felt somehow difficulty during his term, that we were in conflict with what he felt maybe philosophical with the governor. I never experienced that or saw that in any way, so I'm a bit surprised he was saying that. And again, I go back to our original point, we should be the driving agency, not the cart and the horse and back and forth. I think it's very important that we never succumb to some type of political reasoning other than good policy. And again, other than usually each time we do the plan, or certainly every time we come up with a capital plan going forward, there's some controversy on some issues. And that was the only time that I recall us having a problem or being in disagreement with the administration. In fact, as Rita can recall, and Frank, we went that through 2 different governors regarding capital plans, but not the overall plan itself. And obviously, those kind of issues are going to be debated whatever election year is going forward for priorities of sub-regions possibly. But we're looking at the whole general, the responsibility of the whole general region in itself. So, I don't see reason for us to.
Yeah, and the decision, listen, it's going to be yours. It's not going to be mine because I won't be here anyway. But I think the point was that it actually removes a potential barrier to ensuring the soundest policy gets to move forward.
Again, we meet once a year officially with the MPO, and I think if any debate at that particular time would come up, and it hasn't, other than, again, some capital projects. But I think, Randy, of all people, should also know that it was this agency that drove performance base with the state of Illinois, not waiting for the state of Illinois to tell us, well, politically, we don't think we can do it or not. So, again, there's a particular issue where we were the driving force in changing the administration.
So I'm sorry I mentioned his name because the conversation should not be,
For the record, he was not the only one who's brought this up.
I am calling him right after this meeting.
Let's text him
Then
right
he
now.
can share his perspective with you, so that's
Well, honestly,
fine.
I'm kind of not shocked, but surprised that that's really been an issue.
Well, can I just say one thing real quick? I'm not sure that it was in response to some sort of meddling, you know, I think it was more just a general concern that at some point this could become a problem, like an insurance policy, you know? Now, whether that's the right or wrong thing to do to change the cycle in response to that, I don't know. That's for the board to decide. That's why we're talking about it today, so.
Since I sit here but also wear the MPO hat, yeah, I guess I would agree with everything both Mayor Bennett and Rita have said, that, and sit on the MPO, I've not seen any issues. I think the value of CMAP and the planning process is the fact that it transcends any political cycle. And the fact that even if there is a difficult conversation about a project or even a bigger policy issue, that's good. And having that robust debate, even with a political layer overhanging it, I think is part of the beauty. And the fact that CMAP has been able to this board and the MPO have been able to transcend a lot of that and sort of work through the issues, I think is a testimony to sort of staying the course, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, again, I think this board has been on, for the most part, over all these years, been on the same page. Again, when we ran into problems with the MPO policy committee, I think if anything, that was an internal conflict because they represented maybe some interests outside, certainly interests, they were appointed by interests outside of the general, organization itself. And that really is a changing thing, not that we have any control. Governor appoints somebody, or if a board appoints somebody, one of our partners or other agencies out there, they're making that decision as to, who they put on that board. So, and you're right, there's gonna be disagreement, but I think for the most part, we got over that some years ago with having the policy committee being more political than what this agency was during that debate. And I thought it was personal, that became political and not structural or substance or vision of this agency. So I'm the internal optimist, so maybe someday when I'm not here, somebody will change it, so. Are you looking for a decision now?
I'm not, no,
Okay.
no. What we said in the memo was that we would have a recommendation for the joint meeting in October.
Oh, okay.
And, I think we've heard pretty clearly what the sense of this meeting is, so.
Very good, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Gordon, speaking of politics. Hey, I just read yesterday the state got a windfall of billions of dollars, so hopefully
You
they're
want your
smiling.
share?
They're smiling down there, and actually we will get a higher share of LGGF. But
Thank you. That's a good lead. I don't have much to report. I'll just say that. The legislative report is in your packet. The usual process of our report expanding and contracting is in the contraction stage right now because the different pieces of legislation are missing, stated legislative deadlines. And so the bills life that we have been tracking are, moving to, I'll say, the grave. And so that, if you look at your packet, it's considerably smaller. But what I did, so if you've got questions on the actual report that's in your packet, I'd be happy to address them. If not, I'll just kind of give you a brief update on what's taking place down at the Capitol. Yeah, okay. The General Assembly's in the home stretch last month of their session, hopefully. Their scheduled adjournment date is May 31st. I personally believe they will make that, if not just a short overtime. They still have the overall budget to deal with. There are several key initiatives that the governor is trying to accomplish. This session being one, several of them being medical marijuana. The graduated income tax is a big issue for him. Transportation infrastructure obviously is an ongoing discussion that we have been part of that, and also gaming. And so there are a lot of things that are in play right now. They've got a very short time to get this done. I do anticipate that windfall making it a lot easier for them to accomplish, one, the budget, which is the key operational thing that needs to take place, but also freeing up money for some of the other special projects that legislators and the governor have in place. At the end of at your next month's meeting, we'll give you a final report of what the General Assembly has accomplished and where things are at that point in time. And hopefully they will be done with this spring session, but we'll give you an analysis of what's going on. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, if the board isn't aware of it, the Illinois Department of Revenue last night announced a $1.5 billion windfall or unanticipated additional revenue in state income tax, and they're not certain whether that was because of the change in tax laws or people didn't, during the normal year last year, take out enough in their daily paychecks to reflect the increase in the state income tax itself. So I think it's about a $1.5 billion. But it appears that they will, the good thing is that the governor has announced that he will not do a pension holiday, that they'll use that money certainly to make the obligatory annual payment. They're talking about skipping that maybe for 2 years. So I guess that's the good news. Bad news is whether they blow it, and hopefully they won't. They've been around now long enough for the last 5-6 years to understand how important it is to have that kind of money and where to put it. As far as transportation and capital, I was down there last week. They've got a tough task. Is to basically 2 separate programs because of the lockbox. They can't mix revenues anymore. Whatever they generate for transportation, they've got to use for transportation. And the governor's heavily pushing a capital program, which is a vertical infrastructure type program. And it means sewer water, as he explained, also goes down. So coming up with a revenue source or mix to come up with enough money to bond out that side of it is going to be a real challenge. There's other things that are in the mix here of revenues that will go towards the general fund. That's in gaming, that's in the cannabis legislation possibly. So they have a lot on their plate to do it in a short period of time. I thought too that they maybe be done by the end of May. Who knows? I mean, that's a lot. And as you know, at the end of the session, everybody gets nervous about or want to make sure that whatever bill's on there, there's proper amendments or they're all clean on it. So we'll see as that goes forward. But as far as transportation is concerned, obviously that should, hopefully, is more of a major priority than the capital side of it. But again, coming up with some hard choices as to where they're going to come up with the revenue. And I've not even heard any numbers yet as to how big that program that they're thinking about doing. But the important thing is we have signed on with all of our partners around the region that it doesn't turn into some mishmash of how much you want, that they come up with a program that again generates performance-based.
And that's why we're fighting so hard for our core principles that, it's too easy to just do it and do it on gimmicks, as historically has been the case. This has to be done right, with user-based fees that are sustainable.
Indexing, et cetera.
Exactly. So
Other
the
comments?
principles are the key.
Other comments, questions? You gonna be down the next 3 weeks, Gordon?
I'm going down today. Can't wait.
That's why we like you, Gordon. That enthusiasm is just overwhelming. Okay, moving on, and other business. Again, the members that are on the phone, please do not leave. It's critical that you're part of this discussion in executive session. Meeting's open to the public. Any comments anybody may have? Yes, dear.
Good morning, board.
Good morning.
I'm just saying about like the capital budget, this is very important, because we don't want any more bridges collapsing like what happened the other day on the south side, where I saw this on the news where the train bridge collapsed. That just seems scary, because I know like in this region alone, I know that there's several bridges, train bridges that are very unsturdy and they're very, very old. Like on the North Shore, along the UP North line, that's one of them. And UP West and the roads in Northern at Cicero there. Those are like very old bridges that have been around over 100 years. They need to be checked at so another bridge doesn't collapse.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Just to top that, what my wife says, we're also definitely a state capital bill for the total package, because definitely what you were saying, because, and I think also some of our disability communities needs to understand too that we're all in this together, because we feel like, especially where they are at, and especially getting them in independent living, like living in their own homes, and also getting PAs and other things, and especially when we found out that the DCFS is also not doing a good job too. It's really hurting, especially for when I saw that 102 children were killed. That really struck a lightning core on me. That shows you that the budget is definitely, we need a biggest state capital bill right now for the whole state, to make sure that we're gonna be right ahead of it, because they definitely, that they wanna try to dodge it and try to ignore it and don't have enough. That's where we need lots of skills and training, and there are no mentors. So that's a big blow. Where the mentors, where the skilled people and the training to help these other people who wants to be a part of society, but they're being disconnected, and how to reach them is a big barrier. So we need to figure out how we can get them on the right track for the next future generations, so it won't be the same thing from the previous decades. So it's now time for us to say, this is it. We need a state capital bill, and if other states can do it, so can we. So it's time now, because they should look at the other peers from other states, how they did, and they said, if they can do it, why not us? So the time is right now, and it's long overdue.
Thanks, Carlin. By the way, I think I asked you last month if you went down to Springfield to testify before the Transportation Committee. Okay,
He
do
was
that.
down-
Let him, Gordon,
Donald
let him
was
know
down
when the
there
next
last
meeting
week.
comes.
I saw him, I didn't.
Or you can join the coalition.
There you go. Thanks, Carlin. Ladies and gentlemen, again, we're gonna move to go to exec session. I'll entertain that motion. I'll ask the room to please kind of quickly clear so we can get on with this. I'll make a motion, or entertain a motion to go to exec session.
Second.
Moved in second. Any questions? All in favor, signify by a vote of aye.
Aye.
Opposed, vote no. Motion carries. We go into exec session. See you, Carl. Take care.
Garland, who controls the logo for your organization? You can sign up.